The bear had not roared when it came down the slope, only breathed great gusts of breath like bellows, earth churning beneath its weight. He had heard the birds go quiet and the horses toss their heads, and by the time he unslung his rifle, she was already on the ground, a curl of blood on her collarbone. He didn't know her name. He hadn't known anyone was out there in the brush, not until she came stumbling from between the aspens, hair torn and blouse soaked, one boot missing. The bear had her scent. She must have been running for some time, limping from a gash across the thigh. When it rose on its hind legs, he saw its ribcage heave like bellows, steam rising from the heat of it. He fired twice. The first shot hit high, useless. The second caught the bear through the eye and dropped it like a felled tree. His shoulder ached from the recoil, and his breath came in hard knots, but he stepped between her and the carcass as it twitched. Her eyes rolled back. She hit the ground soundless. He didn't touch her right away. That kind of blood, rich and fast, meant something deep was torn. He checked the bear first, then knelt beside her. Her body was narrow and long-boned, not more than 20, with a face sharp from hunger and windburn. She had a band of old scars along one forearm, and something in the way she lay, arms pulled in, body curled like a child, told him she wasn't new to pain. He carried her to his cabin. It was nearly nightfall, and the snow was coming fast, wet flakes thick enough to muffle hoofbeats. Her weight was no more than a sack of cornmeal. He stripped off her coat, laid her near the stove, and washed her wounds with whiskey and boiled water. She moaned once but didn't wake. For 3 days, she drifted in and out. Fever burned through her like dry brush catching fire. He spooned broth into her mouth and changed her bandages. Her body flinched in sleep, and once she cried out in a language he didn't know. Each morning, he left meat at the edge of the woodline, burying the bear's remains in the far ravine. He figured the scent of death would draw scavengers, and he didn't want more blood so close to home. By the 4th day, she sat up. Didn't speak, just stared at him with those pale eyes, gray as river ice, and drank a cup of water without spilling. He gave her space, fixed her another blanket, and moved his cot to the barn. She watched him the whole time, like she was measuring his weight, the strength in his hands, the set of his jaw. He asked her name once. She looked down, then out the window, and he didn't ask again. After that, she walked the perimeter in the early morning, slow but steady, coat clutched tight. He noticed how her shoulders stayed angled, always wary, always aware. Like a deer that had survived too many winters, he didn't press. He just kept the fire going and cut more wood, let her eat as much as she needed. When she started helping, mending the fence, sweeping the floor, he said nothing. It was enough that she stayed. Then the morning of the 7th day, she was gone. Her cot empty, the blanket folded neat, no footprints in the snow, no sound from the woods. He waited all morning, then saddled his horse and searched the glen, the ridgeline, the bear's ravine. Nothing. When the sun began to fall, he returned to the cabin, stomach heavy with loss he hadn't earned. But as he stepped onto the porch, she came through the trees, wearing the same torn coat, limbs gone, hair braided down her back. She stood at the edge of the clearing, wind lifting the hem of her dress. Looked him in the eyes like she had always known him, and smiled. It wasn't a sweet smile. It was quiet, sure, like something found after being lost a long time. He felt it then, some shift beneath his ribs, slow and deep like spring thaw. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something whole, and she walked to him. She slept that night in the cabin again, though she didn't say where she'd been. Her silence wasn't guarded anymore. It felt chosen, like a space cleared for breath. He didn't ask, just set another log on the fire and nodded when she pulled the blanket around her shoulders and sat near the hearth. In the quiet, he listened to the snow fall, a slow, constant hush against the roof. She dozed upright, head bowed slightly, and he watched the way the light from the flames caught in the hollows of her cheeks. Her face had softened some, less bone, more flesh. The fever had passed. By morning, she was already outside, splitting kindling with a short-handled axe. Her movements were precise. He watched through the window a while, wondering at the strength in her arms, the steadiness of her grip. She moved like someone used to labor, but there was something ceremonial in it too, like she was reclaiming the shape of herself. That afternoon, he found her standing at the ridge beyond the creek, staring west. The wind pulled at her coat and hair, but she didn't flinch. He stood beside her for a long time. When she finally spoke, Her voice was low and raw, like something unused for years. I thought it was going to kill me. That bear. He turned slightly, but she didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the mountains, clouds dragging their bellies across the peaks. It should have. I'd stopped running, wasn't scared, just done. She rubbed her hands together. Then I heard your shot. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not shrink what she had survived into something small and manageable, and it was not small. I don't owe you, she said, voice flat, but I'm staying. For a time. He nodded once. They settled into rhythm without naming it. He repaired the roof before the next storm, and she dug a new path for runoff from the well. They shared meals, traded chores, and slowly the cabin took on a different shape, not changed in wood or stone, but in presence. She began humming while she worked. Simple things, melodies that belonged to nowhere and everywhere. He never asked about them, but they lingered in his memory like smoke in fabric. He learned she could track game better than he could, her eyes catching signs he missed. She taught him how to dry sage for burns, how to boil roots for fever. He taught her how to saddle a horse without spooking it, how to read the wind for storms. When they touched, it was practical. A hand to steady, a brush of fingers passing tools. But each time something flickered, nothing urgent, just the quiet possibility of warmth. One evening, as they sat near the fire with plates of rabbit and potatoes, she said, "You have no wife." It wasn't a question. He shook his head. Too long gone. She took our boy east after the second winter near broke us. She nodded slowly. You're not angry. No, he sipped his tea. Some things don't hold. Doesn't mean they weren't worth the time they lasted. That night he dreamed of her standing in the doorway, bare feet on wooden boards, hair loose and wet from rain. She didn't speak in the dream, just looked at him the same way she had that first night she returned, clear, unafraid. When he woke, she was already outside, watching the sky bruise with morning. He joined her without a word, standing close enough to feel the heat from her shoulder. The cold had sharpened, the creek had begun to freeze, and neither of them turned away. The first wolf came down from the high timber in the third week of snow. He saw its tracks near the corral, deep pads, heavier than coyote. The horses were uneasy that morning, steam pouring from their nostrils like ghosts. She spotted the second set of prints, smaller, tighter to the brush. Pup or female, hard to tell. They moved as a pair. He laid out traps, quiet and careful, more to warn than to catch. She watched him set them, her brow drawn low. They're starving, she said. If they come closer, it's not for sport. He nodded but left the traps in place. That night, they kept the fire burning high. She had begun sleeping inside again, but no longer near the stove. Her bedroll stayed across from his by the shuttered window. The distance between them held no tension, just a mutual understanding that silence was sometimes safety. In the dark, he could hear her breathing, steady, unafraid. On the fourth morning, she brought back a hare with its throat clean cut. He noticed the knife at her hip was different, bone-handled, old, not one of his. She saw him looking and said, "It was my mother." That was all. But something opened with it, a thread pulled loose. Later, as they shelled beans by lamplight, she said, "We moved often, sometimes a trading post, sometimes a tent. My father hunted for the army, then left when I was small. My mother didn't speak much after." He let her speak without interruption. She taught me plants, seasons, what to watch for, when to keep still. That bear, she paused, fingers tightening around a shell, I think she would have seen it sooner. Known how to circle back. He reached across the table and placed a hand near hers, not touching but close enough to warm. She would have been proud you ran, he said. Her shoulders dropped slightly, a breath escaping. Not quite relief, but something near it. The wolves returned at dusk. He saw them from the barn roof, gray coats slick with sleet, ribs like bowed branches. They didn't attack, just stood at the edge of the tree line, watching. She joined him on the roof, quiet as snowfall. They won't come tonight, she said, but they will. She was right. 2 nights later, the smallest tried to scale the fence. He shot into the air and watched them scatter like smoke. The traps remained untouched. In the aftermath, she stood at the edge of the field, hair soaked from snow, and said, "I can go." He stiffened. "You don't need to." Her voice was steady. "They won't stop. You're worth more than your horses." He stepped closer, snow crunching underfoot. And you. She looked at him, eyes narrow but not cold. I'm harder to replace. They didn't speak of it again, but that night she stayed nearer to his cot. Didn't lie down, just sat cross-legged by the fire, watching it flicker. He didn't sleep either. The quiet between them held a different weight now, like stone warmed in sun, not just survival but something approaching care. The wolves did not come again, the trap lines rusted, the snow deepened, and the space between their cots grew smaller each night. Winter bowed its head and passed. When the thaw came, it came fast, streams spilling over, earth softening beneath boots. The wind changed first, brushing warm against the skin like breath. Birds returned, so did color. She planted a row of sweet corn in the southern field, dug each furrow with the flat of her palm. He watched from the porch, a mug of chicory in his hands, not offering help. She didn't need it. That spring they spoke more, not often but enough, small things. She told him about a river valley south of Taos, where her mother once trapped muskrats and taught her to gut fish with a single pull of the knife. He told her about his first homestead, 100 miles east, built with green wood and held together by stubbornness. It had burned in a lightning storm the same year he turned 30. Sometimes they spoke without speaking, through the passing of tools, the shared lifting of beams, the way he'd slice apples for her and leave the peel intact, just the way she liked. The rhythm they'd built through necessity had become something else. Not quite routine, closer to devotion. They rode to town together one bright day in May. He needed salt. She wanted calico, though she didn't say it aloud until they reached the mercantile. Inside, she ran her fingers across the bolts of cloth without choosing. He waited, content to watch the way she moved, unhurried, deliberate, free. At the counter, the shopkeep glanced at them, then looked again. "Didn't think you took on a wife," he said. The words hung sharp in the air. Before he could answer, she spoke. He didn't. But there was no bitterness in it, just truth. They rode back in silence, but not the kind that wounded. When they reached the cabin, she dismounted and stood looking at the door for a long moment. Then she turned to him. "You would have corrected him." It wasn't a question, he nodded. "If you'd let me." She stepped closer. The dusk lit her eyes in copper and dusk rose. "Maybe I would have." And then she walked past him into the cabin, leaving the door open behind her. He followed, slow, careful. That night they ate in quiet. He washed the dishes while she folded the cloth she'd finally chosen, dark red with thread like gold dust. She ran her fingers over it once, then tucked it beneath her things. Later, as he stepped out to check the horses, she followed. Didn't speak, just leaned against the fence, watching the sky shift from mauve to ink. "I didn't believe in safety," she said. "Not really, not for women like me." He didn't reply. She turned to him. "But I've started dreaming again. I dream of planting things, staying long enough to see them grow." He looked at her, eyes steady, then stay. She didn't answer, but when they went inside, she pulled her bedroll closer to his cot, close enough that her hand brushed his as they lay in the dark. And when the wind rose, neither of them moved away. The garden took root with surprising hunger. Radish, carrot, onion, sage along the windowsill. She moved through the rows each morning like someone reading a beloved book, eyes sharp, touch gentle. He watched from the porch with his coffee, never interrupting. The days lengthened. By midsummer, the earth smelled of green things and sun-warmed soil. They built a smokehouse behind the barn, split a new stack of wood, and caught trout from the stream that had once frozen solid beneath their boots. They began eating at the table instead of near the fire. She spoke more freely now, not always about the past, though sometimes that too, in brief flashes, like light behind thin clouds. More often she asked about the land, the weather, the quiet mechanics of the world he'd shaped from his solitude. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked one evening as dusk rolled in slow and soft. "I did," he said. "Not anymore." She nodded. Didn't smile, but her eyes held something warm. Later that week, he found her kneeling near the southern fence line, hand pressed to a patch of scorched grass. A fire had crept through sometime during the night, just a lick, not enough to spread. Still, the blackened circle cut stark against the summer green. "Lightning," she said, "or something else." He frowned. "You think someone passed through?" "I think someone watched," she replied and stood. They checked the property together that night. no signs. No prints, no broken brush, but both of them moved more carefully after that. She began wearing her knife again. He checked the rifle twice before bed. The unease passed slowly, like smoke through damp fabric. Then came the rain. It fell for 3 days without pause, fat, hard drops that hammered the roof and softened the roads to mud. The world turned to water and breath and waiting. They stayed inside mostly, read old books aloud to each other. She had a quiet, lyrical voice, and when she laughed at a turn of phrase or a mispronounced word, he felt it catch in his chest like something holy. One night during the storm, the roof began to leak. A slow drip near the corner of her cot. Without a word, he handed her his blanket and began clearing a space beside his own. She paused, holding the wool close. "You sure?" He nodded once. She lay down beside him. Neither of them spoke. Her shoulder touched his and she didn't move away. Rain drummed steady overhead. Her breath slowed, fell into rhythm with his, and in the hush between thunder and silence she reached for his hand, fingers twined, not desperate. Not seeking permission, just sure. He closed his eyes and for the first time in years slept without waking. By morning the leak had stopped. She stayed beside him. By the time the apples ripened, her laughter had changed. It came more often now, unguarded. It rang out while she shelled beans or swept dust from the porch, and once when he tripped over the milk pail, cursing softly, she laughed until her eyes wet. Not cruel, just surprised by joy. He began leaving small things for her to find, an arrowhead by the windowsill, a wildflower tucked into the pages of her book, a sketch of the garden in charcoal. She never mentioned them aloud, but he'd find the flower pressed between cloth or the sketch pinned neatly to the wall. She wove a scarf from the calico she'd bought in spring, deep red with gold thread, warm enough for October winds. He found it folded on his pillow one morning, her scent caught in the fabric like smoke and sage. They were still careful. There was no naming of what had grown between them, no sudden declarations. But it lived in the way she touched his shoulder when she passed, in the way he set 2 cups of coffee out each dawn, one for her before she stirred from sleep. Then came the rider, late afternoon, the sun low and hazed, a man on a bay horse, boots dusty, coat sun-bleached. He rode up the path slow, not hiding but not hurrying. She was hauling water when she saw him, her shoulders straightened. The bucket hit the ground. He saw it too, the way she froze. The way her hand went to the knife at her side. The rider dismounted, didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked at her like he was sorting something old and unfinished. "Etta," he said. It was the first time he'd heard her name. She didn't answer, not at first, just watched him, chin lifted, mouth set. "What do you want, Eli?" she asked. The man, Eli, shifted. "Heard you were dead. Then someone said they saw a woman like you in Ridgewood, trading for sugar and salt. You followed a rumor." "I followed the feeling," he said, quiet. The man looked tired, not cruel but spent. Still, something about him made the hairs on the back of the old man's neck rise, not from threat but memory, like the smell of a place you once fled. "You want me to come back?" Etta asked. "No," Eli said. "I want you to be safe." She stepped forward then, not close, just enough to make her meaning clear. "I am." He nodded once, like he'd been waiting for those words more than anything else. "I left you food, money. You didn't take it. I didn't need it." They stood in silence. Then Etta turned to the man beside her, the one who had pulled her from snow and silence and made a home without asking anything in return. "This is Eli," she said. "He knew me before." He nodded once, hand resting on the porch rail. Eli's eyes lingered on him, thoughtful. "You treat her right." The old man didn't flinch. "She's not mine to treat." That seemed to satisfy something in Eli. He tipped his hat. "You ever need me, Etta, you know where." She didn't respond, just watched him mount his horse and ride off the way he came. That night she stood at the doorway for a long time, not inside, not out, her face unreadable. He stepped beside her, waited, she whispered, he wasn't cruel, just broken. He nodded, sometimes that's worse. She didn't cry, but when she stepped back inside, she didn't sit by the fire or return to her bed. Instead, she walked to his cot and lay down in it, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. He joined her, didn't speak, and as the wind rose outside, her breath warmed the space between them. She slept facing him. He did not dream. The first frost came in silence. They woke to white rimming the edges of the porch, breath clouding in the air between them. She touched the window pane and smiled, faint but real. "It'll be a hard winter," she said. He nodded. "We're ready." By now their days had taken on the rhythm of something enduring. She rose before him, lit the stove, warmed the kettle. He fetched water, split kindling, mucked the barn. Together they strung dried herbs from the rafters, salted meat, patched the lean-to. Nothing hurried, nothing wasted. In the evenings she sometimes sang, not for him, not even for herself, more like for the cabin. For the corners that remembered storm and hunger and wanted to believe in softness. The melodies were low and winding, without words, old as root and stone. One night he came in with blood on his shirt, just a nick from the axe, shallow but bright. She took his hand without hesitation, washed the cut, pressed a poultice of yarrow and crushed pine. Her fingers were firm, her touch lingered. "You don't flinch anymore," she said. "Wasn't flinching, was giving you room." She looked up then. Her eyes had darkened to slate in the lamplight. "I don't need room, not from you." He didn't answer, just held her gaze until the moment passed from words into something older. When she leaned into him, there was no urgency. Only the weight of shared time, of having seen each other through lean days and quiet mercies. She stayed in his cot that night and the nights that followed. There were no promises spoken, no need. The truth of what they were had already been shaped in the marrow of their days. One morning, he found her sketching in the dirt with a stick, lines and curves like a map or a memory. "What's that?" he asked. "A place I might build a small house." "One day." He watched her draw, noting the angle of the roof, the space for a garden. She had left room for 2 chairs near the front door. "Near here." "If you'd want that." He crouched beside her. "I'd help you raise the beams." She smiled. "You already have." As the season deepened, deer came lower into the valley. They hunted together now, moved through the woods like shadow and breath. She walked ahead, quiet as snowfall. He followed, rifle slung but rarely needed. She could bring down a buck with one arrow, clean and clean. One dusk, as they cleaned a kill, she said, "You saw me before I saw myself." "I saw you bleeding and alone," he replied. "Yes," she said, binding the hide. "And still you saw me." They buried the organs, thanked the body, carried the meat back in silence. Not grief, not pride, just respect. By the time the first snow stayed on the ground, they had stopped setting separate places at the table. Stopped folding 2 blankets. The cabin was not hers, not his, but something shared, something made sacred through the choosing. They were not lovers in the way others might speak of it. There was nothing possessive, nothing desperate, just warmth, trust. The slow, patient tending of 2 souls who had come to believe in each other. When she looked at him now, it was with stillness, with knowledge, with something that lived just beneath the ribs, steady and unshakable. He had saved her once from blood and teeth and silence, and now each day she chose to stay. The snow rose in waves that winter, soft at first, then thick and unforgiving. It clung to the eaves like memory, drifted against the barn door, hushed the woods into stillness. In that stillness they lived, time slowed. She embroidered by the fire, slow stitches in the hem of her shawl. He carved a pipe from birchwood, though he never smoked. Some evenings they read aloud, others they simply sat. Silence had long since ceased to be absence. It was presence now, full, alive, trustworthy. In February the trapline froze solid. The coyotes no longer came near. Food was enough, not plenty, but they knew how to make it last. She taught him how to make ash cakes when flour ran low. He taught her the old songs his father used to hum while mending harness. One storm lasted 4 days. They burned extra wood, wrapped their feet in wool, boiled snow for water. On the second night, the wind howled like something mourning. She woke from sleep and pressed her face to his chest, not out of fear but longing. He held her without question. That night they spoke in the dark, not of survival, not of the past, but of what might come after. A spring house, more planting, a place for geese. "I could teach children," she said. "If any ever came through." He ran his thumb along the line of her jaw. "You'd be good at it." She blinked slowly. "I never thought I'd live long enough to think about a future." "You've built one," he said. "I want to build more." When the storm broke, the sky cleared sharp and hard. The world sparkled with frost, and they stepped outside together, shoulders brushing. A bird trilled from the black pine, first sound of spring not yet arrived. He looked at her then, truly looked, wind-flushed, scarred, eyes steady as winter ice. Not just a woman healed, but a woman remade. And she looked at him, not just a man who had saved her, but one who had waited without asking, who had offered quiet, labor, firelight. They had never named it, but standing there, boots in snow, shoulders touching they didn't need to. She reached for his hand, fingers bare in the cold, and he took it without hesitation. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "I never asked you to." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm staying." The wind shifted, gentler now, carrying with it the scent of thaw, the promise of new earth beneath old snow. They turned back to the cabin together, no fanfare, no last words. Just the shared weight of two people who had been alone too long and chose, in the quiet, to build something they could call home.